Elemental heroes are one of the most fan-favorite archetypes in the entire game, and also they're one of the most well-supported and long-standing themes in all of Yu-Gi-Oh! In today's video, I want to focus on one of the original Elemental heroes, and that's Elemental Hero Bubbleman, and this was actually the first main deck effect monster for the series. I want to focus on Elemental Hero Bubbleman specifically because it was a part of many different Elemental Hero decks that saw competitive play. It was the linchpin of one of the earliest competitive E-Hero builds, and now it's not seen so much play in 2019. So in today's video, I want to focus on what Bubbleman does, what it does well, and also why it sort of has fallen off the map in 2019. The idea of the early, older Elemental Hero monsters is that many of them are just normal, non-effect monsters that you use Polymerization or other cards like it to summon larger, more threatening fusions. However, in the case of Bubbleman, it actually has two unique effects. What's interesting about this card though is that the effects on it very clearly are designed for a big anime moment in the GX TV show, and that obviously is because the Elemental Heroes are the main archetype of the protagonist of that series. In the case of Bubbleman, it has some cool things going for it that all will be relevant as we go throughout this video. It's a level 4 warrior monster. It has the Elemental Hero name, which means it's searchable by a ton of other support cards. It also is a water monster, which will be extremely relevant for a couple of fusions and Xyz monsters that we'll talk about in a second. It doesn't have a lot of attack or defense, which means that you're really only looking to use this as material for other cards like Xyz monsters or fusions. And then it has two effects, one of which you'll probably never use, and that's sort of the big anime moment effect. First off, if this is the only card in your hand, you can special summon this card from your hand, and that's the main effect of this card. It's the main reason this card is played. Oftentimes when we're looking at these decks, you'll notice that many of them have normal spells that they can set to sort of deplete the hand to 0, except for Bubbleman, so you can get that free special summon and then activate those spells that you just set. When this card is normal summon, flip summon, or special summon successfully, if there are no other cards on your side of the field or in your hand, you can draw 2 cards from your deck. Now there are some funny degenerate strategies surrounding this. There is a bubble burn deck that saw some experimentation where you use a lot of burn cards that are all -1s, then you summon Bubbleman and draw 2 and hopefully deal 8,000 damage to your opponent. Unsurprisingly though, this draw 2 effect is not the reason that Bubbleman was so successful in competitive play, and it's almost entirely based on the free special summon and all of the different ways that you can search this card and use it in a hero strategy. The first time that Bubbleman saw widespread competitive use was around 2012 and 2013 in a deck named after it called Bubble Beat. Bubble Beat is the successor to the Hero Beat strategy, which was centered on Gemini monsters, and you see some of those same cards like Gemini Spark and Hero Blast still in the Bubble Beat strategy, but the Bubble Beat deck sort of drops many of the Geminis besides Neos Alias in favor of Bubbleman. Now the reason that Bubbleman was so good in this deck, and the reason that this deck topped many YCSs, was all centered on Bubbleman and the abuse of Blade Armor Ninja and Heroic Champion Excalibur. The idea behind these Bubble Beat strategies was to use all of the Elemental Hero search cards like E-Emergency Call and Elemental Hero Stratos to sort of crank out these rank 4 warrior Xyz monsters and end games extremely fast. Some of the best cards in this strategy were things like Monster Reborn and Miracle Fusion, and just in general any normal spells that you could set and then activate Bubbleman and then resolve those normal spells. In the case of Miracle Fusion, you could summon a Heroic Champion Excalibur and then flip Miracle Fusion after detaching both materials to summon a card like Elemental Hero Absolute Zero. That is a ton of damage, and if you don't outright defeat your opponent right there, you now have a 4,000 attack monster and a floater that destroys your opponent's entire board. That is a ton of pressure to put on your opponent and was one of the deadliest combinations in the Bubble Beat strategy. Unfortunately, the Bubble Beat success is short-lived because Elemental Hero Stratos gets put on the ban list, and then people don't really play any Elemental Heroes until 2015 with the Masked Hero structure deck. Now the Masked Hero deck actually borrows many of its core cards from the Bubble Beat strategy, and when I show you one of these regional topping lists, you'll notice that there's a lot of overlap. You still see Bubbleman, you still see Miracle Fusion, you still see Blade Armor Ninja and Heroic Champion Excalibur, as well as many of the Elemental Hero fusion monsters. The big difference between this deck and that old Bubble Beat is Elemental Hero Shadow Mist, Mass Change, and Mass Change 2. These cards are extremely powerful and definitely made the Elemental Hero strategy once again viable in 2015, and this sort of sort of kept the core aspect of Bubble Beat, the aggression, while adding a new unique aspect in Masked Hero Darklaw. Masked Hero Darklaw is pretty much what heroes are currently known for. It's one of the most powerful hero monsters ever released, acting as a macrocosmos that also banishes cards out of your opponent's hand, and it really adds this completely new aspect to the Bubble Beat that many players were excited about in 2012 and 2013. In Bubble Beat, Bubbleman was not the only target that you could add with cards like E-Call or Elemental Hero Stratos. Elemental Hero Alias was a very important piece of those Bubble Beat decks. Oftentimes when you couldn't OTK your opponent, you would use cards like Gemini Spark and Hero Blast to sort of control the board. In the case of the Masked Hero decks, many of them did play one copy of Alias, but for the most part, the only card that you were searching with Shadow Mist 90% of the time was one of your couple copies of Bubbleman. This is a pretty big departure from those Bubble Beat decks, despite the fact that Masked Heroes are more based on cards like Shadow Mist, and they even have Goblinberg and Summoner Monk to trigger its effect. In general, the Shadow Mist is made a lot better by the fact that it's searching Bubbleman. It's also worth noting that both in Bubble Beat and the Masked Hero decks that were playing Bubbleman, Bubbleman itself isn't going to be like the most powerful card in the deck. It's not going to have a huge impact on the board. The thing that makes Bubbleman so good is that it has the ability to be searched by like 100 different cards. Shadow Mist, Reinforcement of the Army, E-Emergency Call, even A Hero Lives if you really want to go that far. There are so many cards that can bring Bubbleman out from your deck, and that makes it so good. It makes it better than a lot of other cards that would fill a similar role because it's a warrior and an elemental hero monster, which means that you can always have access to it. If there was another card with Bubbleman's exact effect, but not with the elemental hero name and not with the warrior typing, it probably would be a lot less good and might have even not seen any competitive play at all. It's in December of 2016 where players really doubled down on all the aspects of Bubbleman. Previously, we've sort of taken advantage of the fact that it's a warrior and that it's level 4 and that it's an elemental hero, but it's not in my mind until 2016 with the release of Toadally Awesome where people finally start using Bubbleman because it's a water monster more so than any other aspect. And that's really interesting because in the past, Absolute Zero was a card that you oftentimes summoned with Miracle Fusion, banishing the Bubbleman, but it's not until 2016 where players are using Bubbleman and its water attribute in every single game. The big difference maker here is Toadally Awesome, which you can summon with Bahamut Shark, and you can easily make Bahamut Shark with 2 copies of Bubbleman, or perhaps a Bubbleman and a Tin Goldfish, a card that people started playing after dropping Goblinberg just because it comboed specifically with Bubbleman. I really like this version of Heroes. It seems like the most streamlined version, and it adds an extra layer of protection to that really powerful Masked Hero Darklaw. Previously, the biggest problem with the hero decks that oftentimes if you could deal with that one copy of Darklaw by drawing Regeki or even Mere Force or Dark Hole, the hero deck didn't really have a lot of cards to actually come back from that. So it made the version of Heroes with Bubbleman and Toadally Awesome so good is that you actually had a way to prevent the Darklaw from being destroyed or banished or anything along those lines. It's a really smart way to sort of take advantage of Bubbleman's features in the case that now we're using it because of its level and its type and its name and its attribute. Pretty much every aspect of Bubbleman is being used in this Toadally Awesome hero deck. So if you've been paying attention, you might realize that the reason that Bubbleman has seen so much competitive use isn't because of what it does, but because of what it is. So the reason that Bubbleman is not seeing play anymore is because what it is just doesn't matter enough. What I mean by that is that there simply are too many other cards right now that fill Bubbleman's role but do it better. They just don't have the elemental hero tag, or they're just not water monsters. But if you don't care about those attributes of the card and you're just looking for a warrior monster, you're going to go with easier things to special summon. Things like Junk Forward, even things like Marauding Captain saw play recently, but Bubbleman is a little bit too hard to summon, so that means if you're not searching it for free off of cards like Shadow Mist, you're just going to play other cards instead. Now, Bubbleman isn't a bad card, and certainly hero monsters are still seeing play today, but when people are playing hero monsters, they're not thinking of Bubbleman. They're not even thinking of playing a lot of spell cards. Many of the hero monsters that are seeing play these days are like Destiny Hero Malicious or Vision Hero Vion, maybe one Stratos, maybe one Shadow Mist. Those 4 monsters are still seeing play, but they're seeing play in monster-heavy decks, which Bubbleman doesn't really fit into. When we think of those old Bubble Beat strategies, people were just playing 8 or 9 monsters. They're not playing 100 monsters, where when you look at the modern Dark Warrior decks, oftentimes they are playing a whole bunch of high-impact monster cards that are just extenders, and you can't really afford afford to play a card like Bubbleman when very often you won't actually be able to summon it. In other words, the story of Bubbleman and how his fate ends up is very similar to the story of many previously competitive cards. It's not that Bubbleman is a bad card or a terrible card, it's just that there are other cards out there that do its job better than Bubbleman does in 2018-2019. That's a big deal when players are trying to play the most efficient decks possible, so yeah, you might have some dedicated hero players that are still playing Bubbleman in 2019, but for the players that are even trying to play the most competitive version with heroes in some sort of warrior deck, they're going to be looking towards cards like Vion and Malicious. Not so much Bubbleman, or Shadow Mist even isn't seeing as much play anymore. Bubbleman is a decent card, it just doesn't have a deck to go in anymore. Potentially this card could come back in the metagame if we had more cards that care about it being a hero monster or it being a water monster, but in the direction that the game is going right now, it seems like levels and heroes don't seem to matter that much anymore. People are just trying to summon 2 warriors to summon the Isolde and start their combo off, and there are cards like Junk Forward that simply are much easier to summon and less bricky than Bubbleman, so it's going to be pretty hard for Bubbleman to find a home in a competitive deck. Still, it maintains one of the longest competitive runs of any card, especially a card that old, and it's cool to look back at a fan favorite that actually saw a ton of competitive use in a variety of decks and formats. I hope you guys enjoyed today's discussion video on Bubbleman. I'll see you later. Thank you so much for watching. Goodbye.